Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new lecture entitled Fieldwork and Ethnography. This is a very important lecture because we're going to discuss methods in anthropology, and you will learn about how do anthropologists conduct research, how do they collect data, how do they gather information in order to understand people. So for this course, I'm going to introduce you with the main methods that I used in anthropology. Then I will take an example. I will take my own example of the fieldwork I did, and then we will discuss what ethnography is. All right? So we'll try to answer the following questions. What is fieldwork? Where is the field? And how does one access it? What does it mean to see ethnographically? What are we observing as anthropologists and how? What are the characteristics of this thick description? And why? Why do we do fieldwork? And what are the challenges associated to these fieldworks? Let's start first by discussing the origin of fieldwork. When did it start? And then it will lead us to a definition of it. Armchair anthropologist. That's how anthropologists who did not conduct fieldwork were called. Armchair, it simply refers to the office where anthropologists were sitting before anthropology used what we called fieldwork. So it was in the 19th century when the discipline first started, if you remember. From middle end of the 19th century. At that time, anthropologists could not easily travel. And so they were using others' writing. So for instance, they were using writings from traders, from missionaries, from any people that got access to a specific place, that traveled to a specific place, and that wrote something about this place. And that's the reason why we call them armchair anthropologists, because they did not leave their office. They only stayed at home, and that's where they studied. So an armchair anthropologist usually refers to late 19th century and early 20th century scholars coming to conclusions without actually going through the usual anthropology motion, so without actually going to the field. Individuals like James Fraser or like Tyler that we briefly mentioned in the previous chapter, and you can see here his picture, are great examples of armchair anthropologists. Also Marcel Mauss, a very famous French anthropologist, was an armchair anthropologist. So they did not do any fieldwork, they stayed at home. So what does exactly mean fieldwork? By saying that, I'm sure you now understood that fieldwork means going somewhere. The anthropologist has to go somewhere and experience something. Let's look at the proper definition. Ethnographic fieldwork. So basically the fieldwork is the primary research strategy in cultural anthropology mainly, typically involving living and interacting with a community of people, not only for 2 weeks, but it's usually over an extended period of time, right? And why do anthropologists do that? It's to better understand the people they would like to study. So they have to live among the people that they wish to study in order to fully grasp and fully understand what is going on. What are they doing? Why do they live in the way they do? And what do exactly they're doing during the day, at night? So if they want to understand some specific people, a community, a specific culture, anthropologists have to live among those people. And that's what fieldwork means. Now, during the fieldwork, anthropologists use different types of methods. Let's discuss now what are the tools that anthropology use to study people. So, during the fieldwork, here, Anthropologists use mainly two main methods. First, they use what we call participant observation, and second, they use what we call interviews. I'm sure you all know what interviews is. Interview is basically asking questions to people and getting answers. It could be different types of interviews. It could be a private interview with individual, so only one person, or it could be public group interview with many people, right? And there are different ways to conduct interview, but asking people directly some questions. This is what interview is. Then participant observation. Participant observation is very specific to anthropology, and by the way, it's more and more borrowed in other disciplines as well. Like, for instance, in sociology, they're using participant observation now, and more in geography as well. Psychology, they can as well, and also it's borrowed in the business field. So participant observation, it's basically what it means here. It's observation, so observing people, noticing what they are doing, and participating at the same time, right? So you don't only observe, but because you're living among the people that you're studying, you also take part of the different activities people are doing, and that's why we call it participant observation. This is very important for you to remember those two methods, interviews and participant observation. And participant observation has been studied first with Branislaw Malinowski. If you remember, we discussed his work in the previous chapter, and he's the one who lived and studied the Trobriands in what is now called Papua New Guinea in the South Pacific. He went there and he studied their economic relationship. He studied an entire system of exchange called Kula. So he's the one who studied these methods, and he's the one who first claimed the importance of living among the people in order to understand them. That was at the beginning of the 20th century in 1920. Now, you can use different methods as well, and actually it's not exhaustive because we could have add more methods here, but you can use survey, even though it's not that well spread, but anthropologists can use that, or documents, any type of documents, what we call the gray literature, for example. So everything that is produced by the country itself, the culture itself, the community itself. For instance, articles from newspaper, or it could be laws as well, rules, anything that is written. Objects, so it could be artifacts as well. For example, a mask used in a ceremony, specific jewelry, or it could be clothing. It could be anything that is produced by the culture that the anthropologist is studying. Of course, we are also using film more and more, and photos as well. Now, let's talk a little bit more of the fieldwork and how do anthropologists conduct research. So I mentioned that anthropologists use fieldwork, and I also said that it's not only used by anthropologists, but more and more by other social scientists. Participant observation is key in anthropology. This is the main source of information, living among the people and observing them. Now, anthropologists don't only observe, they also take notes, because otherwise it is very difficult to remember what they've been observed. When you do a field work, you will notice many different things. You will see and you will pay attention to a lot of details that you won't be able to remember afterwards. So it is very important to consign everything in what we call a field note or a fieldwork diary. This is another thing anthropologists do. Now, interviews, I mentioned that. Now, there are also other things that could be used and done. Kinship and social network analysis, for example. When you arrive in a place, it is always interesting and it might help you to understand the context and what's going on by analyzing the kinship system. So kinship has been used by many anthropologists to understand the local context. We will talk about marriage and kinship in our last chapter. Social network analysis, it's also important to see who is connected to whom and how does it work. What are the relationships between the people that you are studying? Very important also not to do any mistake because you could be used in some dispute, in some conflict. Now, the anthropologist has really to pay attention to whom he's going to bond with and to whom he's going to talk to, because this could affect then the data that would be collected. If you speak with a person that is enemy of another, then obviously you will be considered as living and defending one side, and it might block you to access some information. So anthropologists also have to pay attention to social network and to local politics. And then life histories, anthropologists can use that. So that would mean to interview people, to collect some biographic data, and to question people on what they've done in their life, to ask them to entirely explain their life. So to have also an insider perspective on the culture that anthropologists are studying. Remember that the insider's perspective is called the emic perspective. So anthropologists should also collect some data and try to understand the people through their own eyes by interviewing very, very deeply someone and asking questions about a person's life. Just briefly, I wanted to show you here the field note or the fieldwork diary. So this is a book written by here Emerson, Firth, and Shaw. There are different anthropologists who wrote about the importance of field notes. And here, just to remind you that field notes is very important, and anthropologists during the field have to take notes about what they're observing. Now let's talk a little bit more in details about what do anthropologists do in the field. That's actually the question here. What do anthropologists do in the field? You might have answers to that. Maybe you can imagine what you would do if you would do a fieldwork yourself. What do you think you're going to do while living among a group of people? I guess you would think about eating, chatting, doing any activities that they're doing. And you would be right. So, in order to be a bit more specific, allow me please to use the fieldwork I did and to use my own experience. Now, if I want to talk about my own experience, I have to take you through the South Pacific, because this is where I did my fieldwork. As you can see here, the country where I did my fieldwork is called Vanuatu. And Vanuatu is located in a region called Melanesia. Melanesia is in the South Pacific. Melanesia is comprised of 5 archipelagos, among them Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu, and New Caledonia. Vanuatu here is located not too far from Australia. It's located here. It's about 3 hours flight from Brisbane or Sydney in Australia, and 3 hours flight from Auckland in New Zealand. Vanuatu is an archipelago. It has a Y shape. As you can see here, it's comprised of approximately 80 islands, and those islands form the shape of the letter Y. The capital is Port Vila. Port Vila is located here on the island of Efate. It's approximately in the middle of the archipelago. Vanuatu is an independent country. It became independent in 1980, and it used to be a British and a French colony at the same time. This weird colonial situation led the country to a bicephal situation. It means that during colonial times, people could choose if they wanted to be educated in either French or English. They had two different currency, the franc and the sterling. They had pound sterling, sorry. They had two different economic systems somehow, two different political systems, of course, and it was completely divided, but not in terms of the territory, but in terms of the system itself. And just briefly to give you a little bit of context about what I studied there, I basically studied the relationship between the national language, which is Bislama, and the national identity. So I wanted to understand for my PhD research the relationship, I wanted to understand the process on how people are feeling a sense of belongingness by talking through the national language. Indeed, Vanuatu is very well known to be one of the most diverse country in the world in terms of languages that are spoken. So it has a very high linguistic diversity. So here in this archipelago, more than 130 languages are spoken for a population of approximately 250,000 people. So it is a lot of languages for only few people, and they do not understand each other, and they have one language to communicate together. This language is called Bislama. It is a Creole, English-based Creole, and it is now the official language. However, it hasn't been recognized in the educational system, for instance, and people are still complaining about this language and arguing that Bislama is not a local language, but is coming from outside. So my research was to understand how do people feel that they belong to Vanuatu through the analysis of this language, Bislama. I'm not here to talk about the outcomes of this research. We could discuss that later if you want, and I will tell you a little bit more when we will talk about language and culture, because my PhD research was related to linguistic anthropology. I, however, wanted to show you a few pictures of the fieldwork I did. So here in these pictures that I took during the fieldwork, you can see that anthropologists during fieldwork usually participate. So what do anthropologists do? They do the dishes, they cook, they follow the people, so they go to church or they go pray to wherever people pray. If they don't pray, of course they don't. So they basically live among the people and experience what they do. You can attend some specific ceremonies as an anthropologist, and you can also document that. And anthropologists during the field follow the rhythm, follow the flow. I have to say that also anthropologists get bored because, of course, it is very difficult to all the time be available for the people, and of course those people are not all the because it is sometimes difficult to have someone that is always on the way of the people, that is always here asking questions, taking notes. It is sometimes a bit awkward. But that's what anthropologists do. In order to understand what the people are doing, they have to live among the people. Here are some other pictures of a ceremony that happened. Here, the ceremony was about. Now, what are some of the challenges the anthropologists would face while doing fieldwork? I'm sure you are all thinking of some answers. And maybe you're thinking of cultural shock. You would be right. It is difficult to adjust sometimes. What is it about cultural shock? Cultural shock is the experience of differences. So it could be about, the weather, or it could be about the language, the climate. It could be about clothing. It could be about language, anything, behaviors, and so on. But it is difficult indeed for anthropologists to adapt to a new culture. Let's look at some of the specific aspects, some of the specific challenges. And the question could be, fieldwork. Is it an art or not? Because somehow it is something that you learn, and something that takes time to gain. Why? Because it's all about negotiating complex interactions. Anthropologists have to quickly understand what's going on in the field, who is in good relationship with whom, and who is related to whom, and what is going on between the people that are in front of them. So, negotiate complex interactions is one of the main things that anthropologists should do, and it is a skill that anthropologists must have. Of course, they also have to build relationships of trust, because if people don't trust you, they will not talk to you. You will not be able to gather good information if people are not trusting that they can talk to you. So trust and building a relationship of trust is key. And that's, by the way, the reason why anthropologists stays for so long during the field, because in 2 weeks you cannot build a strong relationship with someone. It's like, any friendship. Of course, you need time to be able to connect with the people, and for those people to trust you. Now, they have to make sense of patterns of behavior. They have to understand why do people do what they do, and to make sense of those behaviors. And this also can take some time, because you don't necessarily understand at first why do men eat on one side and women on the other, for example. Why do people do what they're doing, if they pray before to have meal, if they have a specific way to cut a vegetable, if they have a specific way to prepare something, then it has to be for a reason. Either it's a belief, or it's a habit, it's related to cultural information that you have to understand as an anthropologist. Now, they also have to be conscious of their own biases. So this is what we call reflexivity, and reflexivity is key in anthropology. So what is it exactly? So basically, anthropologists, because they are also humans studying humans, they are impacting the data that they are collecting. For instance, me, as a female, going to the field while I was young, because I moved there, I was 24. I was single at that time. I didn't have children. I was French. I was also a teacher, because I didn't have any scholarship and I had to work there. So I had a specific status related to job I performed there. So being that social being also made me collect some specific information. As a woman, I was more inclined to talk to women, and I collected more easily information coming from the women because of the cultural context that exists in Vanuatu. If I would have been a man, most probably I wouldn't have collected the same information. Same as being French also led me to collect some specific information. So this has to be taken into consideration while analyzing data and while collecting the data as well. This is what we call reflexivity, the ability for a researcher to question himself or herself. This is what Pierre Bourdieu, a very famous French sociologist, called um, subjectifying the the subjectivity. So we have to make the subjective information become objective. And how to do that is to be aware of the importance of the self during the field, the social self, and is to um, question it. Now, as an example of this, I wanted you to read this article I posted in the Google Classroom. The article is entitled Nacirema, and here's a short extra just to make you know that I want you to read this one. I also have another example for you to read. The other example is the video I would like you to watch, and you will have three different examples of fieldworks done by American anthropologists. So this article is particularly interesting because in this article you would find that the, the anthropologist is talking about a very famous group of people that everybody knows. However, because he talks about those people from a very distant way, using a very mysterious vocabulary and using some ethno- et, sorry, exotic words, then it gives the impression that he's talking about a wild tribe in South America or in somewhere in Africa. However, he's only talking about the American people. You will discover in the article that actually Nacirema it's American backwards. You see American, American backwards. And in this article, because he talks about the Americans from a very distant standpoint, then it makes us feel that here he's talking about an ancient tribe somewhere. And I found this article very interesting because it shows that anthropologists can position themselves as outsiders, remember the ethic perspective, and in that way they would be able to analyze the people from a more efficient way, I would say. So who are the Nacirema? The Nacirema are the American. And in this article, the author, Minor, that's his name. This article was, by the way, written in 1954, so a very long time ago. And he talks about some body rituals that these Americans have. So he talks about some daily ceremonies, as he called that. And basically, those daily ceremonies are related to the body. And the main idea in this article is to show how Americans are obsessed with their body, how they want to change their body. Where do they do that? In a specific room dedicated for that, which is the bathroom. And he talks about the bathroom, and he talks about the sink, for example, saying that it's like a shrine and people are doing some specific rituals. What are those rituals? For instance, brushing the teeth. And he talks about the holy mouse man, who is the dentist taking care of the teeth and so on. So some very specific vocabulary to make people realize that it is not only about what we say of some people, but it's also the way anthropologists say it. And finally, I would like to discuss here two terms that are important in anthropology. The first one is called ethnology, and the other one is called ethnography. So what is ethnology? You might hear this word, so I wanted to explain it to you. Ethnology is here the science dealing with the comparative and analytical study of cultures. So in some countries, actually anthropology is not used as a discipline, but the term ethnology is the most used one. But here it's basically comparing different cultures. So ethnology is a subfield of cultural anthropology. Subfield of cultural anthropology. Now, what is an ethnography? Ethnography, it's so fieldwork ethnography is, doing the fieldwork and writing about the people that you're studying. By the way, ethno is coming from ethnos, that means people, and graphy here means writing. So writing about people. And here, what an ethnography usually refers to is a book-length description of a specific culture or cultures studied for an extended period of time. I have included here examples of ethnographies. For example, a very famous book called Coming of Age in Samoa. This is the one written by Margaret Mead. We discussed that last week, if you remember. Or we also mentioned this one, Argonauts of the Western Pacific, written in 1922 by Branislav Malinowski. The Nuer, remember, about the Sudanese people, written by Evans Pritchard, the British anthropologist. And then you can find many different examples of ethnographies here. I'm not gonna comment all of them, but ethnography is a book-length description of a specific culture or cultures studied for usually an extended period of time. And this is the end of this lecture, lecture 4, about fieldwork and ethnography. So in this chapter, we have learned about fieldwork, what a fieldwork is. We have learned about methods used in anthropology. We have learned about challenges experienced by anthropologists. And we discussed two examples. We discussed the example coming from my own fieldwork, and we discussed the Nacirema example. I hope you enjoyed that lecture. I will meet you next week, and take care of yourself.